Good morning. I hate to cut off a great conversation, but we've got a jam-packed agenda this morning, so I'm going to get us started. My name is Mike Hill, and I'd like to welcome you to the second edition of the West Coast Chamber's January Advocacy in Action. Glad you could join us this morning. That's as good as it's going to get this morning. So I'd like to say a big welcome to our digital attendees as well. Thanks again for the partnership with the City of Holland in bringing this event to those that are still in the pajamas and bunny slippers. So big thank you to all of our sponsors for the Advocacy in Action programming that the Chamber puts together. And we're going to kick this thing off right away with an update on City of Holland projects from Holland's wonderful mayor, Mr. Nathan Bocks. Come on up, Mayor Bocks.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, I was told I have about 45 minutes because there's a lot going on, and I want to welcome you all to a beautiful spring day here in Holland, Michigan. As I was talking with some of the folks that are here, we're actually going to be shooting a video later this morning on the opening day of Windmill Island, and it could not be a more spectacular day to open Windmill Island than a day like this. As I was putting this together, I thought to myself, when was the last time I spoke at a chamber event? It was actually at a governmental affairs breakfast in early March of 2020. And I was asked the question, hey, it looks like there might be something on the horizon in regard to a pandemic or something called COVID. What's the city doing about that? And I said, well, we've been talking about it. And I said, I've only been mayor for a couple of months. I've been elected in November of 19, this was March of 2020. And I said, what I can tell you is the City of Holland is in good hands. We've got great people, great staff, and we know what it is that we're doing. And now when I say we, I'm talking about the big group, because it's certainly not me. We've got an incredible city council, we've got incredible city staff that makes all of this happen. And so I'm going to take the time that I have to tell you about three things. One, where we've been, what we've done in that time frame in the last 2 years, where we are right now, the things that we've got in place right now, and then where we're going, because there's a whole lot on our plate. For a long time, I kept a little sticky note on my computer that had 12 different major projects that we got going on in the City of Holland, all at the same time, any one of which would keep a city of our size moving. So, where we are? Well, in 2020, when I first came in, the world was upended. And we weren't sure what was going to happen. And all of you in this room went through that same thing. And we had to figure out how we are going to keep this community going, how we're going to keep the police, and the fire department, and the water, and the electricity running. We needed to keep the trains running on time in this community. And for those of you who may be thinking, no, we do not have anything to do with keeping the trains running on time, so if you've got a problem with the train, please do not call the mayor. An incredible job of keeping the trains running on time during a time of incredible uncertainty. Every day, it seemed the rules were changing. We would make plans all morning, and the governor would come out in the middle of the afternoon, and the rules would change, and we would scrap everything that we've been working on and start all over again. And in the midst of that, we still did some major projects. During that first year, we passed a comprehensive anti-discrimination ordinance in the city. We made it so that it was illegal to discriminate in the area of housing, employment, or public accommodations in the city of Holland, and did that in August of 2020 at the height of the pandemic, worked through that process. We also completely revamped our zoning and planning code in the city of Holland. This was a culmination of a multi-year process and brought that to fruition in our Unified Development Ordinance. And updated our comprehensive community energy plan. We are considered one of the greenest cities in the state of Michigan. We do an incredible job in our environmental sustainability, in the way that we produce our energy, and also in the way that we save energy. And we put together a Blue Ribbon Commission that came up with recommendations for the city, and all of those were adopted by City Council. Also, our Holland Energy Park, Dave Koster standing right here. He'd love to spend probably a half an hour talking about the great things that are happening in Holland Energy Park. We paid off the majority of the construction bonds on Holland Energy Park early, saving the public $40 million in interest payments. That also allowed us to lower the electric rates for the city of Holland by 10% last July 1. While we lowered those regular electric rates, the rates that you pay for the regular service, we also said, we have a sustainability rate, renewable energy rate that you can pay. We made that renewable energy rate the same as the previous regular rate had been. So on July 1, you could switch from regular energy to completely renewable energy, and your bill would not change. We still have that opportunity. If you're City Hall resident, go to the BPW website. You can just click and check that as your option. We also, if you haven't noticed, giant anaerobic digester being built right downtown. That is going to save us millions and millions of dollars in waste removal costs. Also going to make it so that that waste can actually be used much easier in the farming industry. We'll have more uses for what's coming out of there than we do right now. Our outdoor playscape, in conjunction with the Outdoor Discovery Center, we have a beautiful outdoor playscape at Window on the Waterfront. That was actually just given to the City of Holland. We just accepted that gift on Wednesday night. Great community project with the Outdoor Discovery Center. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is during the pandemic, even when there was a whole lot of uncertainty in the world, we had 500,000 square feet of new commercial construction begin in the City of Holland. People were still investing money in the City of Holland, even when it was uncertain around the world. And then, of course, Waterfront Holland. Great thing to be talking about right on this site. That is an ongoing process. We went through about a 2-year visioning process. We then put out a request for qualifications. We got 3 developers that were qualified. We then put a request for proposals. We received 1 proposal back, and our city staff is working with some consultants that we've had out of the Chicago area to see whether or not that proposal aligns with the vision for the community. You've probably seen some letters to the editor that are out there. As any of you who are elected officials might get a little bit frustrated when you read a letter to the editor that people say, they should do this, they should do that, they should do this thing. They should involve the community in this. Like, we went through a 2-year visioning process. We've already gone through that, and now we're working with it. Anything with Waterfront Holland is going to likely require a public vote. Because in the City of Holland Charter, we are required, when there's any exchange of waterfront property that's owned by the city, and we happen to own property right over here, it requires a public vote, and it requires a 60% positive vote from the city. So the city residents will have a direct voice in whatever may happen with Waterfront Holland. So that's just the stuff that we did during the pandemic. Where are we now? I think we're stuck here somewhere. I'm usually a tech guy. There we go. Thank you. Look at that. Wonderful. Let's give her a big round. So where are we? Gee, following right up with Waterfront Holland. This was a over 2-year visioning process. Like I said, we are currently in the process of reviewing that plan. There will need to be that public vote moving forward. You'll probably see this again on the slide of where we're going as well, because these are long-term projects here in the city. One of the things that we're very good at in the City of Holland is planning. We plan before a shovel ever hits the dirt. And a lot of people think, oh, they just decided to do that thing. No, there's a lot of legwork that goes on with anything that we do. Housing. I'm sure that that's not an issue for any of the rest of you that are out there. Housing. How do you deal with housing and the incredible growth that's happening in this community? We approved more affordable housing projects last year and units last year than we ever have before. More are on a path to be approved this year than last year, and those are ones that just go through the Planning Commission. There are lots of planning that takes place, and we are looking at all kinds of options, every tool we have in the toolbox, to be able to try to get as much housing as we can in the community at all price points. Because anybody who knows anything about housing knows that you need to make sure that you've got housing at all different levels. LG Energy Solution. Anybody heard about this project? $1.7 billion of investment in the community. 1,200 jobs. We just approved the site plan at the Planning Commission. 1.3 million square feet of new construction over 15 buildings. As we were sitting in the planning commission, I was reminded of the movie Hoosiers. Remember when they finally get to the finals and they're in this huge basketball arena, and they take out the measuring tape and realize that it is exactly the same size court as they have in their own gym. A $1.3 million project can seem like a huge basketball arena. We apply the same rules to a project like that we do to a simpler project. We actually had one that was about 5,000 square feet at the same planning commission meeting that actually was more difficult than the LG Energy Solutions project was. Along with that is a $10 million revolving fund through the state of Michigan to help with the item right before with housing. So we're going to be looking for gap funding from that $10 million to help get projects completed that may not have been completed otherwise. Our downtown refresh, you can go downtown right now. Tulips are blooming in Holland, Michigan. There are just a handful of what I like to refer to as the tulips in the wild. But if you go and look at the brand new planters that we have downtown, there are all kinds of tulips that were grown in our grow house. Those planters look absolutely spectacular. We're going to be working over the next couple of years to refresh and update downtown. A Fillmore Township 425 plan, we're working with Fillmore Township. It's actually coming to the City Council this week for our public hearing on it, where we're going to be exchanging some real estate. We're going to be getting some real estate into the City of Holland from Fillmore Township in exchange for water service to some areas of Fillmore Township. A culmination of about a decades-long process of working this out, and it has been an incredibly friendly, fruitful process on both sides. And still, we keep the trains running on time. So where are we going? Again, I want to make sure we keep the trains running on time, because that is the primary thing that we need to do. But you can see all of the other stuff that we've got going on. We've got 2 fire stations in town. Both of those are going to be completely rebuilt over the next couple of years. How can we afford to do that? Well, our incredible assistant city manager, Matt Van Dyken, has developed a 50-year municipal capital improvement plan. Yes, 50 years. We're looking at 50 years at all of the expenses that we may have in the city for all of the facilities that we have, with the idea of fix it first. We're going to fix it before we're going to have to replace it. We used to pay for that capital improvement at the end of the budget year. We go, there's money left over, let's throw that into repairs and maintenance. We now actually have that as part of the budget. So we've got a 50-year plan to fund all of the maintenance and all of the improvements that we need in the city. Along with that, we just unveiled, our financial planning team just unveiled 20-year financial forecasting tools for us. How incredible is it to be able to look out 20 years and have a really good idea of what funding we will have? Now, obviously, as you get 15, 20 years out, it gets a little fuzzier than it is in the 5 or 10 years, but to be able to have the tools helps us make great decisions at the City Council level. We are working on our non-motorized transportation plan. We want to make sure that Holland, Michigan is friendly to non-motorized transportation, and if you want to have a hand in that, and discuss that, we're having an open house at City Hall on Thursday evening, Thursday afternoon, 4 to 6 p.m. So come down and join us and be part of that conversation. Again, Waterfront Holland, showing up past, present, and future. This is a long-term project. We want to make sure we do it right. We want to make sure we do it well. We want to make sure that we've got a plan that works for the people of the City of Holland. We're planning on extending College Avenue to the north. Right now, that ends at Window on the Waterfront. We're going to be extending it a couple of blocks and developing a new, what we refer to as North Downtown area. And one of the hubs of the North Downtown area, brand new ice rink. Frank Cry, a local retired school teacher, over the last 10 or 15 years or so, has donated a little bit here and there. He had donated $116,000 specifically toward an ice rink project in the city. I'm able to share this because Frank shared it so many times now, I think it's fair game to say it. Frank was talking with his financial people, and they said, you know, you're a millionaire. And he goes, what? I'm not a millionaire. And he goes, yeah, you're actually a millionaire. So Frank decided, well, you know what? I don't need all of this money. Frank gave $1 million on top of the $116,000 that he'd already given toward that ice rink project, and it's absolutely going to happen. And we're having an open house tonight from 6 to 8 p.m. in the City of Holland at City Hall if you want to be involved in that project. And then tomorrow is going to be a charrette and design process that's going to be taking place to come up with great plans, great ideas, includes not just a sheet of ice. Frank wants there to be curling. Frank wants there to be like a path of ice to go around. We're looking at hockey. We're looking at skate rental. We're looking at the possibility of heated benches from snowmelt. We're looking at the ability to be able to cool the ice using the snowmelt system. I'm not a physicist, but I'm told that that can happen, that they can somehow pull the heat out of it using snowmelt. Dave's not in his head. Dave knows this stuff better than I do. That there's a way to be able to cool that ice using the snowmelt system. And Frank has also said we absolutely have to have hot chocolate. So we're going to make sure that there's hot chocolate there as well. And then we just also received a $5 million gift from the James Hearing of the state, and that is going to be dedicated toward a recreation center. We're way at the beginning processes of that. One of the only things I can tell you is the site that we're looking at for that is near Bocks Pool, which is at 16th and Fairbanks. Works really well with Bocks Pool site, works well with the skate park that's there, works well with Hope College, with their Ray and Sue Smith Stadium that's taking place. That will be happening, more planning will be happening with that over the coming years. And then last but not least, broadband. And that's all I'm going to say, because I'm going to leave it up to Dave to give you the details on what we are planning for broadband in the city of Holland. It's incredibly exciting and forward-thinking. So with that, any questions? Do I have enough time for questions? One. I got enough time for one question. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Dave then. Thank you very much.
All right, good morning. That's a hard act to follow. And I think when I was here last talking with the chamber, we were right at the front edge of the construction of Holland Energy Park. We had just gone through a very exhaustive stakeholder engagement process in our community. And it's exciting to be back with you because, again, we have a major initiative. And this is just another representation of how Holland comes together for really challenging projects to find great solutions. But those solutions come because of the community involvement, because of the stakeholder involvement. And when we look at building, we build a power plant, but it's not just a power plant, right? It's iconic in our community now. It's a destination. We've integrated trails around it. We've got a visitor center inside of it, all because we thought outside the box a little bit and what can we do better and more as we relate to energy in our community. Well, broadband is the same way. The Holland BPW has been providing broadband services in our community for 30 years or more now, actually. And this is not a new thing for us. We've done a lot to work with internet service providers to connect large businesses in our community. A few years ago, at the urging of the City Council, we did a pilot project in our core downtown between 7th and 9th and between Garrettson and Maple to see if we could figure out a way of reaching our small business and our residential sector more cost effectively. That project went really well, and now City Council, for a lot of reasons, and one of them is this pandemic that we've just been going through, and the fact that that has really raised the level of awareness of the importance of broadband to the community, but also just generally, as a community that sees the value in controlling its own destiny on infrastructure to raise the level of performance of the community altogether. City Council has identified this as a priority for us in our community. So today I'm here to talk about our latest initiative, which is Holland City Fiber. And I'm very glad to have some of the BPW team members with me as well. I got Pete Oswell and Becky Lehman and Ted Seiler over here, one of our board members, Paul Lilly. And it's a collaborative effort between the city and the BPW on this. So let's see if I can advance this, or I'm going to have to probably go over here as well. Right. Looks like none of these want to work for me as well. Okay. All right, thank you very much. So again, the city's goal here, because of the importance of fiber infrastructure, because of the fact that the city sees this as something that's essential and that everybody should have access to it, the goal here is to make fiber optic broadband available universally throughout the city. Figure out a way that can reach everybody in our community to improve access, to increase choices as well. That's a really key factor here I want to come back and hit a little bit. and to positively impact quality of life and economic development in our community. So when you think about this venture that we're doing is not anti-competitive, as some people might say, well, what's government doing? What's the city doing getting into broadband? No, we're actually looking at trying to create something that will increase choices available for people, which I'll hit on a little more. And what we've been tasked to do, the city empowered staff, the city and the BPW, to engage our community along with a supporting task force. And we went out there and we talked to constituency groups from a number of different sectors. We talked generally with the public, and we also used the Frost Center for research to engage in some of that feedback. But when we did that engagement, here are some of the key takeaways that we found. First, people view broadband as an essential infrastructure, essential service on the same level as water, wastewater, and electric. It needs to be something that is just understood that it's essentially a right that everybody has to have access to that. It's so important in our lives today that it reaches that same level. There's also a strong majority that believe that a community-owned broadband network would allow significant increase in access from residents and businesses in our community. So if everybody collectively got together and made an investment in that, that would be a good solution. And they also, again, they strongly agree that a community-level investment is really what's needed in order for that to occur, for that community-owned broadband to actually be in place, and that would be something necessary to allow access to all. We like to use the analogy of roads, and this goes back to this increased competition concept here. We're talking about an open access infrastructure. So the idea here is building, instead of paved roads now in our community like we have, we're looking at building the fiber optic infrastructure and then allowing commerce to go across that, allow different choices to come across that. And if you look at the graphic that's up here, we all have probably during the pandemic been doing a lot of online buying, right? You know, whether it's Amazon or, you know, you're getting deliveries from UPS or FedEx. They don't all build their own roads, right? There's one great set of roads in our community, and then we're able to allow commerce to come and go across that. Why is that different in our broadband situation? The concept here is build a world-class, future-enabled system that is open then to all different types of solutions to go across it. It's not a new concept for us. We've been operating an open access network with these large users that we've had in our community for years, and we have 6 different internet service providers that we've been working with. We see a path forward where we could do that again throughout our entire community and then allow choices across that. So the goal here is fiber past every home through a community level investment, okay? And then fiber access and going to every home under an election that everybody would have. So let me just break that down for you a little bit more. The proposal that's being put forward now to City Council a little bit later this week, that they will be deliberating and ultimately potentially putting to the voters in the City of Holland, is a concept for about a $24 million investment to run everything that's in orange over here on the top, the conduit and fiber infrastructure and the network electronics, to go past every business and every residence in the City of Holland. That would be something that everyone participates in. We're looking at a village question to be put forward to the voters of Holland, and then that village would fund a bond that would be used to raise the funds to allow that infrastructure to be built. Once that is in place, then everybody has a choice. Everybody has a choice in terms of whether they would elect to actually run that fiber from the street to their home, and also whether or not they would actually take service. So again, everything that is over on the right is an election. Everything that is on the left of the screen as you're looking at it would be part of that community question. So to break it down a little bit further in terms of infrastructure versus service, again, up on the upper left here, an annual bill coming from your millage that would support the infrastructure. We're looking at a first year maximum of about 1.5 mils. And then that goes down because the bond and the millage would be tied to the servicing of the bond. So as the bond servicing costs go down, the millage rate goes down over time. We're looking at that being an average of about 1.12 mils over the life of that. Okay, some of that is in flux a little bit because, you know, when you're issuing debt, there's a lot of uncertainty until you actually do sell the bonds. But that's roughly the kind of thing that we're looking at. Now, once you decide that you want to take service then, and this infrastructure is built, you can elect to have a drop built to your home. It's about an $800 investment, but we will allow the customers to recover that, or we'll recover that over a 10-year period of time. So that's about $7 a month for the drop, or the service line to your house. And then the actual service in terms of operations and maintenance and the internet service combined is about $35. So all told, you're about $42 for gigabit, 1,000 megabits per second, symmetrical service. So, you know, you hear discussion about, well, the download speed is this, but the upload speed is much less. In the fiber optic world, that is symmetrical, so it's just as fast going up as it is down, which is important when you're doing a lot of business, you're doing a lot of interfacing on web and things like that, where you're doing a lot of video calls. You know, having that upload speed is also important. So once you have that, now again, this is an open system, so we're giving an illustration of what it would be if the BPW provided internet service, which we do in our core downtown area. But, as I mentioned before, our interest really is being the network operator and the infrastructure owner as a community, and then letting the private sector come in with all the different solutions that could run on top of that. So again, this Wednesday, City Council will be deliberating over some language as it relates to the millage question. Should they find favor with that, then that would be put forward as a referendum this August, and at the primary election in August. And should that receive favor from the community, then we're looking at a design in the winter and then getting into the actual construction next year. Talk about phase 1 deployment. This is probably a 2 to 3 year deployment process for the entire community. And so there's a lot of work ahead of us yet, but we're very excited to be engaging the community in this way on a challenging issue, and again, bringing the community together to make this decision collectively, which has really worked well on a number of other initiatives that we've had over the years. So that's where we are in broadband, fiber optic broadband, and again, any questions that anybody had that I can answer, I'd be happy to do. Yeah.
Just a quick question. Why is the passing and drops not in the village?
Yeah, and so, you know, we did look at a number of different options. The question is why not both the passing and the drops in the village? I think one of the things that, again, the goal was to provide access, and one of the challenges that's there is that access really is about getting you to the point where it's very easy to make that election to bring it to the House or not. And so when you look at the additional drops on top of it, it would be a fairly large millage question at that point. So we wanted to break it down to really help lower the barrier significantly, which the $24 million element does that. And then it still provides some level of decision-making on the individual property owner at that point. So that was just, you know, one way of kind of taking it to a point where you have this combination of the lowering of the bar significantly on the cost, but still allowing some choice in terms of the final solution that people would have. Again, there's nothing in here that says you have to abandon your incumbent provider. I mean, if you are comfortable with your connection that you have today, again, you do participate in the passes, but, you know, as far as the drop goes, that is a separate electable thing at that point.
So is the fiber already laid, or are you guys gonna lay fiber? Is it dark fiber under there, or how's that gonna interrupt traffic if you guys have to lay fiber? And then also, how do you keep the service price at $7? Are you, like, because, you know, currently we don't have a big enough pipe to provide service for everybody, so how do you get that from Comcast or AT&T?
Right, so the numbers here are related to, I The numbers that are here, the $7 is the actual drop from the street to the house. The internet service, the other $7, is really an illustration of what it costs for us to access midstream bandwidth to be able to provide fiber optic into our system. And then the $28 is just the operating cost of the network inside the city of Holland. So we believe that those figures, and they are based upon our consultants' review of those, that would be able to provide gigabit service availability throughout the entire city of Holland, symmetrical. If there's a participation by everybody, then that's what the situation would be for us. We're very comfortable with those numbers being able to provide gig. We would actually design the system for 10 gig capability, and so some of the equipment that's going in, it won't be dark fiber, it'll actually be network electronics that will be on top of it as well, and we're designing it for 10 gig capability.
There was funding in the infrastructure bill at the federal level. Senator Victory's working on some piece of legislation that has funding for broadband. It seems that everybody's talking about it, and there's money coming from everywhere. Is this redundant, or should we just wait and we get someone else to pay for it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The question is about funding coming from the federal level down to the state, as it relates to infrastructure support. One of the things that is going to be important to look at is what the definitions of like underserved and unserved areas would be as it relates to the prioritization of some of those funds. And I would say for Holland, one of the things that we're looking at is it could be challenging to see a lot of those funds come our way as a city, as opposed to maybe prioritization around rural areas. It doesn't mean that there won't be, and we certainly will work to reduce the amount of costs that go into the millage question, right? And so if there are other sources, that could supplement it. I do know the city has access to some of the ARPA funding. There is some discussion about some utilization of that potentially as it relates to the $24 million investment. But again, we will be very interested and working very diligently to try to find other sources to try to lower the millage number as much as possible. But I don't see that being something that's going to just completely eliminate the need for that kind of some level of investment there. Yes, sir.
Will this be confined just to the city of Holland, or will it affect the townships around us at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. Will this just be in the city or the larger area? This is a city question. So when you look at the millage question, again, the taxable parcels that are there are only within the city's jurisdiction. Now, what we have said, if townships can figure out a solution to also raise the funds for infrastructure deployment, we certainly are interested in joint ventures. We are interested in partnerships. Our staff, the Pete Wells group in our broadband services area would love to be able to grow, our presence as it relates to operating, the underlying network in some of those areas. And we think there's some economy of scale to be gained if that could happen. But the question really that the city council has before them is really related to the city jurisdiction. Thank you so much.
You would be hard pressed to find somebody more knowledgeable about utilities than Mr. Koster. So thank you so much for being with us this morning. And Mayor, thank you very much for the update. At this time, I'd like to invite our state legislators up to the front. We've got about 20 minutes left with them. We have State Representative Jim Lilly and State Representative Mayor Whiteford is with us. He's not. So before I dive in with some questions for our state legislators, does anybody else in the audience have a question that they'd like us to dive into right away? So Senator Victory, when you were with us last month, we talked a little bit about this legislation that you're working on. Can you give us just a status update on how that's progressing?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. My pleasure. Senate Bill 885, we had some robust discussion last month here. We had the supplemental pass-through. There were some components in that supplemental bill that were keyed up through Senate Bill 885, especially dealing with the water infrastructure and those components. One aspect in Senate Bill 885 It's much more of a holistic approach, and while the supplemental that came out had some more prescriptions to it, some of the areas when we were talking about our water treatment facilities, that got narrowed down to those communities of 10,000 and less. So we're looking, scrubbing through that supplemental appropriations, seeing what things can have adhesiveness to Senate Bill 85 and gather that direction. Now, what we'll do is we'll reboot Senate Bill 85 and looking at those IJA dollars, those ARPA dollars are still in the balance sheet and navigate to some of the needs we're addressing in Senate Bill 85. So while we're also doing the general budget process, so and in the MDR budget, we're kind of keeping up some of those areas with placeholders and some other areas too. But this, I want to make sure that everyone's aware of, when we roll out these general budgets, the subcommittees this week in the Senate, this is the first start of it because we're looking at, do we address the sales tax on gasoline, and if we're going to keep those things in the discussion, our current budgets have to reflect that, so that's all part of the negotiations. But yeah, and with the other supplemental, so work is in action. I really do appreciate our stakeholders from our economic development folks here. They've been critical of bringing me. Had an excellent discussion with Quentin Messer, NBGC director. He gets it. I really but the problem is when our current formula, you put the cost per job ratio when you're working on these projects, and they just don't score. And that's why we go back to the discussion a month ago. We have to flip the script because we're geared toward manufacturing. Now, nothing against manufacturing is a key component, but if we're going to develop diversity of the state of Michigan, especially develop our food processing, food security, and all these issues, and lower that cost of the hyperinflation at the checkout counter at a local grocery store, we have to have a different model in place. And I can go much more deep at the financial ones we were actually doing some at our table here, and why can't these organizations borrow those dollars and finance those dollars for those sewer treatment plants that on their own balance sheet. And if you want to go into that sometime, I could give you a good discussion. I see you're smiling because it's restricted. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Victory. You mentioned the operative board in Lansing right now, budget. Maybe turn to the representatives to see if they can give us any updates on budget. I think, Mary, you work on a particular part of the budget, so could you give us an update on what you've been up to?
Absolutely. So I'm Vice Chair of Appropriations in the House, and then I chair about half the state budget, the Health and Human Services budget. A handful of budgets were voted out last week from subcommittees, and then I am finishing up my budget. It's about $32 billion. We should be done tomorrow so we can get it to print, and then we will be having our subcommittee meeting next week on Wednesday is when I'm scheduled. So that's the schedule right now. I feel like my job is always making sure that we're ready, but we never know what's going to happen, when it's going to be signed into law by the governor because of all the negotiations. We had, I think it was $140 million above projections for this past month, for March. So every month we have skyrocketing increases, money that we didn't expect. And so there's a lot of moving pieces. I know in my budget I'm prioritizing mental health, as I've been focused on for the past 8 years, just making sure that we have places for these kids to go. I found out recently there's about 200 children languishing in emergency rooms, hospital beds, in their homes who need specialized treatment, whether in Hawthorne, our state psychiatric facility, or kids in the child welfare system who need really highly specialized residential care. It makes me crazy. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit because, thank you, Nathan, I mean, this community having a 50-year plan, it's amazing. When I go back to the Department of Health and Human Services, I ask for a 5-year plan, and they can't give me that. I'm like, I've been ready and willing to work with you guys for the past 6 years, and now they're going to try to fix this? It's frustrating. But we'll get back into the behavioral health things. I know Mike has another question for me in a bit. But we'll keep things moving, and I'm always prioritizing West Michigan. We have Mosaic Counseling, who's in our county, and I prioritize $100,000 every year because they raise that amount of money, and then we give a grant. And that was just me talking to Sarah over there. She does a great job, and making sure that this is baked into the budget and going into the future. I've been challenging other companies around the state to do this similar program with another $100,000, but nobody's taken it up. So let's just focus on what Mosaic's doing for Ottawa County and creeping into Allegheny County as well. And then there's a few other shelters, West Michigan, let's see, Feeding America, West Michigan. That's always really important to me, but other priorities in West Michigan that don't have high-powered lobbyists to go and advocate for. So I love when I can help the little guys in West Michigan. So you'll see some good investments in my budget recommendation.
Thanks, Mary. One other thing I think this group would probably be interested in, and it's a budget that I've been watching in particular. I don't sit on appropriations myself on the policy side of the house, but I think everybody in this room would probably be pleased to see what happened in the transportation budget, to look at when we have opportunities for additional sustainable revenue, we're deploying that into this area. And I think we saw the House Transportation Subcommittee do that last week, and so I'm really pleased about that. You know, 1.3 to 1.4 billion dollars, not $2 billion, but it's a lot more than the $0 increase, and so it's certainly in the right direction. And I think it will make a big difference as that's continued to be deployed over the coming year. So it was significantly higher than the executive recommendation, but it's my hope that we can continue to work together with the Senate and with the executive office to make sure that we're getting more dollars into that, because certainly that's an investment that's going to pay off for generations to come.
So just staying on the budget topic for a second, the last few years the states have had a surplus, and we also have ARPA dollars and so on. So there's been different attempts in the legislature, both House and Senate, in terms of looking at tax cuts, whether fuel tax to adjust fuel prices or income tax. Any progress being made, or do any of you see any the state giving dollars back to citizens in one way, shape, or form?
Yeah, because so the House and the Senate have both passed several different tax proposals, and they were straightened out by the governor with the veto pen. As I alluded to earlier, I think we do have an opportunity to address the sales tax on gasoline. The reason I bring that specific one up, that's a revenue that's produced at the pump that doesn't go to the repair of the roads. I think Representative just highlighted the houses just done, but it's a misnomer. So here's an opportunity to get whatever revenues produced at the pump back to the roads. And this is why it's also critical as we reboot this, because it's not just, we got to start changing the style of how we fund the roads, and that is with mobility coming to the forefront, electrical vehicles in the areas. We're going to have some very serious conversations, and I think this is a start of having that dialogue, so that way those who use the roads pay for the roads, and that way you collect that revenue at that forefront, and that way we can adjust this, take the sales tax off. It's our first step forward on that philosophy or that theory of how we refinance our roads, and we got to start moving business. We're going to be building a huge battery plant here in Holland, and that battery plant is going to produce for production vehicles that are contributing very minimal to our road infrastructure. So as we do that investment, we better make sure that we are also having a secure, sustainable investment into our roads.
So, like you mentioned the concept of a surplus in the budget this year. So the House Senate fiscal agencies have sort of identified about $800 million-ish of ongoing revenue. Now, higher could end up being lower than what the number actually is, but based on their economic forecast for tax collections going forward, that's what they expect it to be. So we do have a unique opportunity now as we can think about doing things like what Roger just mentioned. Could we look at replacing the sales tax on gas with an excise tax, which basically would then push all of that money to roads and would be diverting it into other areas of government. That probably makes sense, especially as Roger mentioned, that we're going to be funding infrastructure differently going forward as fuel efficiency continues to increase in vehicles, as we substitute gas burning cars for electric cars. Our whole concept of how we funded roads in the past will need to change. And because we have this surplus in the budget now, it's a unique opportunity to look at making some of those shifts. And so, again, I think as much as I think everyone up there would like to lower taxes for folks in the room, we are also cognizant of the fact that every time one of our constituents hits one of these potholes and it costs them $300 or $400, that's a significant increase and a significant burden on taxpayers as well. So again, I think that's why you're seeing the huge increase that we have seen in the transportation infrastructure budgets on the House subcommittee, and I think that'll probably continue going forward.
So I've noticed in the past 6 years that I've served that our baseline budget, even before COVID, was up about $500 million a year, every year. So impacts in a positive way that has happened, the wayfare tax. We now tax out-of-state purchases. We've got marijuana revenue coming in. We have all this gambling money coming in. It is time to give the people of our state a break in their income tax and go back to what was promised and bring it back to 3.9. So I've always supported bringing down our burden on our hardworking Michiganders. Over and over, we hear from the Democrats, and why the governor vetoed it was that, oh, it's only helping millionaires. I'm sorry, I have a $32 billion budget that's a safety net. It's time to give our hardworking people a break on their taxes as well. You hear about people going to other states, going to states that have no income tax. I mean, there is a reason why people move to Florida, to Arizona, to other states, and it is time for us to give our hardworking Michiganders a break, especially with everybody in this room.
Representative Whiteford, just to shift gears slightly, it's been a few months since we've had a chance to see you, and a few months ago you made the news for some mental health legislation that you've been working on. So can you talk to us a little bit about what that's all about?
Sure. So when I was first elected, and prior to that when I was knocking on doors, I found mental health was a really big issue. So I white papered this. I said, okay, what are we going to do about getting more professionals into the workforce? Well, current year, we've got $1.6 million. That's going to get 35 new psychiatric nurse practitioners over at Wayne State. I found out recently it's the cool career. They had more people applied to become a psychiatric nurse practitioner, a 4-year doctorate program, than they ever expected. We also have a proposal from Wayne State to have 250 social workers trained to work in our crisis stabilization units. And then I've got Michigan State that wants to have a similar program. We're already investing, it's up my ducks as a program, to get more psychiatrists and psychologists into the workforce. So that's the workforce issue that I've been working on. And then crisis stabilization units, I got that signed into law 2 years ago, so we can have freestanding crisis stabilization units. We haven't had them so far because it takes time to develop those rules and get them up and going, but I want to prioritize funds to be able to have grants to do that. And then we've got something called psychiatric residential treatment facilities that gets people out of psychiatric units into more of a home-like environment. So they're not ready to go home, especially these kiddos, but they need kind of a halfway place to free up psych beds for the really intense kids. So all these things going on, but the final piece was our community mental health system. I was on the board, and I remember when I was representing the region, is that they said, okay, you guys aren't doing well, Lakeshore Regional Entity. Now for you guys all to get along and to do this right, it's going to cost another $1.2 million of administration. Well, I asked, where's that coming from? Well, it's just going to come out of our Medicaid money. So I'm like, okay, you're going to take money that's supposed to go to help people in our communities, and you're going to put it into admin, and that's going to make everybody sing Kumbaya. So I got really worked up. That was right before I got elected. So that was the final piece. I spent 6 years figuring out how is the system now, and how can we make it better. There are 650,000 more people on Medicaid in our state than pre-pandemic. So what does that mean? We went from a behavioral health line of just over $3 billion to $4.6 billion is going out to all of our community mental health agencies right now. But when the economy does better, and there's fewer people on Medicaid, their budgets are going to get slashed. Because our communities are funded based on the health of their population, not on who is being served. So I looked all over the country figuring out how can we have this a person-centered system so that when somebody needs help, our severely disabled people, mentally disabled, severe mental illness, kids with autism, kids with severe emotional disorders are all part of this now $4.6 billion line item. So how do we have that money follow the person? Well, I figured it out because I found out there's several other states do it with great success. We cannot, they're like mini managed care organizations. Our county is, and then our region's another one. So let's streamline it. The money follow the kid, follow the adult, make sure that we've got, for somebody who's going to never get better. I mean, somebody with Down syndrome will always have Down syndrome, right? So let's make sure that there's a budget for that person in our community, so we keep our community mental health system intact because they know their community, let's keep our commissioners as part of, with their very important role. So we're keeping all the baseline solid and having our neighbors taking care of neighbors, which is what I found out in my community mental health. And then let's streamline that so that it just goes straight to the top. We have the potential, my first numbers were $100 to $300 million of savings that would go back to taking care of people. But with the budget at $4.6 billion, that's over $400 million that would go straight to taking care of the people in our communities. So that's what I'm working on. On the Senate side, it puts everything in managed care. The money doesn't follow the person the way that I want to do it. And so I am having a conversation finally with Senator Shirkey. He reached out for the first time. He was going around telling everybody he's been working with me. Not one conversation. So I also think, health plans involved. We have a governor whose dad used to be the CEO of a major health plan. There's a lot of money to be had out in this public system. And I want to make sure it's person first, person centered. And if we do that, people taking care of that person, the direct care workers, we'll have enough funding for that. Why are they making minimum wage? Why are we dealing with this direct care worker issue? They are the number one most important person in our people's lives who need this help. And I think if we right-size the system, a lot of things are going to be solved. It's just scary when you've had a system for 40 years to make changes. But actually, it's the people who have been around for 40 years who said this is the right way to do this. And I'm just going to keep on fighting for the people who have no voice.
Thank you very much for that update, Representative Whiteford. As always happens to us, we've run out of time. I certainly invite everybody to stick around the network as long as you want to. A big thank you to our state representatives for being here, for Mayor Bocks and Dave, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it very much. Preview coming attractions next month. The main event will be hearing from Congressman Fred Upton, so it'll be great to hear an update from him. And then in June, we're going to be hearing from many of the folks who hope to be sitting up here in the future. So you'll have a candidate forum and get to hear from the different candidates running for the various races that we're going to be facing in the coming months. Thank you for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful week. We'll talk to you all soon.